My intention with this video is to give everyone an understanding of how to use the Host of Ascension detachment well, the tactics and the units to use to help you play. If someone says, move your screen onto the natural expanse and prepare to trade, most people will not have a clue what that means, so I use normal language. Mostly. You can always ask for clarification in the comments. And a screen is a unit that you put in front of a more valuable unit so it gets charged instead. And you're okay with that. But this is not a word explaining video. It is a Christian von Carmian video, there to help the newest of neophytes and the scarred old first generation veterans. The playstyle of the Host of Ascension is lots of shenanigans, the Genestealer Cult-like shenanigans, and the ability to kill the enemy, like really kill them dead, and it works with all kinds of units. It emphasizes the ambush style of play for the Genestealer Cult, and it uses that deep strike ability that all our infantry units have. Use that! Kill the enemy, and with our resurgence points, have more units than the enemy ever does to score loads of victory points. This is a good starting detachment for new players, and it teaches you the main strengths of the Genestealer Cult by making the strengths stronger. And the detachment works with pretty much all the Genestealer Cult units. It's not super specialized like the Outlander Claw or the Biosanctic Brood Surge. Like 2 of the stratagems specify infantry, 1 of them specifies battle line units. That's the limit. And the enhancements can go on any Genestealer Cult character. The Host of Ascension is good for combat units or shooting units, whereas the Index version, which is very similar, was mainly for shooting. It's only our transports that don't really benefit, as they're unlikely to arrive from reserves. But transports are still valuable as transports. So, the Host of Ascension detachment rule, which is the same as it was in the Index. Each time a Genestealer Cult unit is set up on the battlefield as reinforcements, until your next fight phase, all weapons equipped by models in the unit have sustained hits 1 and ignores cover. So coming from reinforcements, that's strategic reserves where you walk on from the board edge, it's also deep strike. Disembarking from a transport is not the same as coming from reserves. The units inside transports exist in this weird liminal space, neither on the table nor off it. And somehow abilities don't work inside transports, but they do when in reserves. I suppose if you disembark from a transport and that transport started in reserves, then you would get the bonus of the detachment rule, but why would you do that? Either start the transport on the table, or have the unit start in deep strike reserves. Sustained hits is generally useful, and ignores cover is great, especially when there's loads of terrain on the table. And Tau, Votan, Imperial Guard not being able to get an extra point of armor to their save is important. And this detachment rule stacks well with the Ridge Runner, so that when they use their crossfire ability, so we have an extra point of armor penetration, that actually lands, and doesn't disappear into the benefit of cover. No benefit of cover when we ignore cover. Now the bit that people miss is how long the rule lasts. It doesn't end with the battle round. It ends after your next fight phase. Not the next fight phase, your next fight phase. So if you arrive in the movement phase of your turn, from deep strike, you get to shoot the enemy in the shooting phase with sustained hits and ignore cover. If you charge the enemy, you get sustained hits 1 in the fight phase. Then it ends. If you arrived in the enemy turn through cult ambush markers or rapid ingress, it will work in the enemy charge phase if you fire Overwatch. You have sustained hits 1 and ignore cover. If they charge you in their fight phase, you still get sustained hits 1. And then going round into your next turn, you still get the bonus in your shooting phase, and then in your fight phase, and then it ends, because we've gotten round to the end of your next fight phase. So you might want to put lots of units in reserves. Most mission packs like Crusade missions, the White Dwarf Bunker missions, and the mission decks allow up to 50% of your points to start in reserves. And no more than half of your units can start in reserves. That's a combination of the units that you choose to start in strategic reserves, and also units that have deep strike that go into what is collectively known as reserves. The core rulebook alone makes no limit on the number, at least no cap on the percentage of units in reserves. Strategic reserves are capped at 25% regardless. But as every way to play outside of the core rules has a 50% cap, I assume you're playing with a 50% cap. Besides, a Primus can redeploy units into reserves in excess of this with their decoys and misdirection ability. First we'll look at the stratagems. This is where we have quite a few shenanigans. And the Genestealer Cult do like their shenanigans. All 6 of these stratagems can be used, some of them get used more than others. Primed and readied, 2 command points, and you get critical hits on a 5+. It works in the shooting phase or it works in the fight phase. It's obvious to use on units coming from Deep Strike or Cult Ambush with sustained hits from the detachment rule. Then as a critical hit, not only is it automatically successful, so if the enemy had some like -1 to hit thing and you were firing a seismic cannon that normally hits on a 5, forget about that -1, critical hits always hit. And also, critical hits trigger sustained hits and lethal hits. Also, this stratagem doesn't require arriving from reserves to use it. It also works generally on units with a Biophagus or Benefictus that give their units lethal hits for shooting or in combat respectively. Get the most from it on units that roll lots of dice. 10 Metamorphs with the 5 attacks each profile. Or 20 Neophytes firing loads of guns. 2 command points is expensive as stratagems go. Use it on a unit with a Nexus to reduce it down to 1 command point. You can further boost this up by having a Primus as well or instead of that gives the Neophytes +1 to hit. It's not as good as their previous full rerolls to hit, and having +1 doesn't affect what triggers a critical hit. If you rolled a 4 on the dice and get +1 to hit, that is a 5, but critical hits only apply to unmodified dice rolls. Add the Ridge Runner Crossfire bonus for an extra point of armor penetration, and with this you can bring down... well, calculate it using the Adept Roll app. You can factor in almost anything to this app. You can consider 60 Battle Sisters, a Catan Shard, the feeling parents get when they see their child open their eyes for the first time, 10 Custodian Guard. Consider hanging off the edge of the Leaning Tower of Pisa throwing jelly babies at people while screaming, "This is what the Patriarch wants!" I haven't used all the settings, but some of those are in there. See how well a 6-shot heavy stubber does compared to a 1-shot mining laser when you have sustained hits and lethal hits on a 5+. And look at what that does against a Leman Russ compared to against Bullgryns. The app lets you figure out what target to strike. Try comparing it by having a Nexus in the unit for a cheaper primed and readied compared to the Primus giving the unit +1 to hit. Add in one of the enhancements that gives lethal hits, or compare just having a Benefictus only for lethal hits. See if 2 units with 20 coming up at the same time with different characters can perform different roles. Perhaps the Benefictus' unit has the role of taking down tanks with their inherent lethal hits and las cannon brain, while 20 Neophytes with a Nexus gun down hordes. How well does that play out? There's not much point in reducing a Leman Russ to 5 wounds on average, where it will still fight just as well as if it was at full health. It is okay to overkill. The link to download the app is in the description, and you can use the coupon code VONCAR. That gives you 10 free imports and 10 free AI explanations if you're into those. You can redeem that after your first simulation, or by clicking More, then Settings, then Miscellaneous. So that's the first stratagem. Critical hits on a 5+. And there is an enhancement that we'll cover later that gives your unit lethal hits on top of the sustained hits, and the critical hits on a 5+ applies to both the lethal hits and the sustained hits part. There's a short video explaining how the two work together. The next stratagem is Tunnel Crawlers. This is the stratagem that lets you deploy 6 inches away from the enemy rather than 9 inches when you arrive from Deep Strike. It's any Genestealer Cult unit using Deep Strike, but you're not eligible to charge in the turn you use this stratagem. This can be used from Cult Ambush if you arrive in your turn using Deep Strike. There's an FAQ about that. But you can't use it in combination with Rapid Ingress or Cult Ambush markers because it is not your movement phase. It is your opponent's movement phase. This stratagem is used in your movement phase. The obvious use is for a unit of Acolytes with Demo Charges. The Demo Charges have an 8-inch range. If you were set up 9 inches away, you couldn't throw them, but you can if you're set up 6 inches away. But you have to stack on more support to get real value for them. You hit on a 5+. You could have a Primus to make you hit on a 4+. I suggest having a Primus somewhere in this army. This is one place they could go, and leading Acolytes also helps their combat clause, because it's +1 to hit on all of their attacks. But let's talk about using this stratagem for blocking. It is somewhat of an unfun tactic and not to be used on new players. They will learn about it sooner or later. Let it be later. In turn 1, your Atalan Jackal Bikers and Pure Strains form a line to block the enemy movement, so they can't get out of their deployment zone. You have a lot of space in no man's land, and across the board, and then in turn 2, deep strike a line of 20 neophytes to stop the enemy again from moving on to objectives. They've spent their turn 1 getting through the bikes and pure strains. Now they have another unit to fight through. This is a bit like the Xenocreed Congregation's Downtrodden Rise stratagem. It's a hard block. You will not advance beyond this point. You continue to control objectives with your other units, while your enemy can only move or charge as far as the neophyte line. And by choosing which models you take off from shooting or from attacks in the fight phase, you can keep multiple units held up, because unit coherency is not checked until the end of the turn. So you can stop enemies from consolidating onto objectives. They have to instead consolidate into your models, even if those models are out of coherency. Doing this can hold up the enemy for the first 2 turns. This is assuming you went first, but it still works if you go second. But going first, you've scored your secondary missions turn 1, the enemy scored maybe nothing. You've scored primary mission and secondary missions turn 2, the enemy scored, again, maybe nothing, or they might get a few points from holding their home objective. Then you start your turn 3, you score primary, you're going to score lots of secondaries. That's half the game's worth of primary. That's more than half the game's worth of secondaries. Your opponent has to try and catch up in the last 2 turns, and that's very difficult for them, because you use this stratagem to set a line of neophytes in front of them. I wouldn't do this in a 1000 point game, as you'd be throwing away more than half your army to slow the enemy down for 2 turns. That doesn't work so well. They'll be able to get out, kill you, and then make enough points back. If you can't also damage the enemy, then the enemy is too strong and they control and score for the rest of the game as your troops diminish, even with some of your units returning from Cult Ambush. Though there is another way to return our units to the battle. Return to the Shadows. This has had a revamp from when it first arrived in the Genestealer Cult Codex. It's a much more standard leave and return stratagem, which some people call uppy downy. But since we go back underground and then come back up, it's a downy uppy. You use it at the end of your opponent's fight phase, and one of your infantry units, not in engagement range, gets to be removed from the battlefield and placed in strategic reserves, so they will be coming back through deep strike. This is infantry only, so you can't do it to like Jackal Bikers. What I recommend doing in the Host of Ascension is when you're striking with your deep striking units that are deep and also striking, attack one of the enemy's flanks. Just one side and wipe out maybe a third of their army, if you can. But if you can kill the things on that flank, it's harder for the enemy army to get from one side of the board to the other to attack you. Your army can walk onto or retake the objectives you just cleared, and don't have the same problem the enemy does, because one of your units can disappear off the board. You're not slowly walking across the table. So one of your units, like neophytes that get lethal hits, perhaps from a Benefactus, leaves the table and comes back, they deep strike again, you get the detachment rule again, sustained hits, plus ignores cover, and you can strike the other side of the enemy army, or strike the enemy home objective. And you've got your sustained hits and your lethal hits from the Benefactus. Important things to note about this stratagem. Units are not destroyed if they're in reserves after turn 3. That penalty only applies to units that started the game in reserves. Also, you can use this ability in your opponent's turn 1 if you went second and have your unit arrive back in your turn 1. Again, the limit of no units arriving from reserves in turn 1 only applies to units that started the game in reserves. Another useful thing, you can use abilities like war gear abilities while in reserves. So if you got shot somewhat and lost some models, after the enemies finish their shooting phase, assuming you're not in engagement range in the fight phase, you use Return to the Shadows, you leave the board. In your command phase, while in reserves, you recover some models, and then you can deep strike again in your next movement phase. You don't have to come back in that movement phase. It doesn't have to be the next turn that you arrive. You could have a unit of like 5 Pure Strains or 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers. They dropped in turn 2 and they complete a secondary mission. Then there was nothing valuable for them to do, so you took them back underground into reserves, and then you wait until turn 5 when you get a good secondary mission that needs a unit in a place they can deep strike in. This is a good stratagem. What about Coordinated Trap? It is 2 command points, and you use it at the start of the shooting phase or the start of either player's fight phase. 2 of your Genestealer Cult units attacking the same enemy get +1 to wound. That's a good combo with 2 units of 20 neophytes arriving from deep strike. They've got sustained hits, maybe they have lethal hits, but you've now got +1 to wound against a very tough elite enemy unit. Or you could do it with a Ridge Runner and 20 Neophytes, because you were going to fire that Ridge Runner first anyway. Now the Heavy Mining Laser has a simpler time wounding. This is an easier stratagem to use if there is a Nexus in one of the squads to make the stratagem 1 command point instead of 2 command points. They are one of the targets of the stratagem, so they can use their ability to reduce the cost. You could combine it with the Assassination Edict enhancement that I'll explain later, or have a Primus, and then you can get a much sought after +1 to hit and +1 to wound. One of the drawbacks is that until the end of the phase, the models in the unit can only make attacks against that one enemy unit you picked. They can't split attacks either way. That can lead some models without line of sight to not be able to target anything, they're now not shooting at all, or some models that were in combat are now not making any attacks even though there is another eligible target unit. It's good that it affects 2 of your units, but unless you can get the most out of those 2 units, I would stick to Primed and Readied as a choice of a 2 command point stratagem, especially if you have lethal hits on the unit, as well as sustained hits from the detachment rule. Deadly Snare is used in your opponent's charge phase just after they declare they're going to charge. One of your Genestealer Cult infantry units, so not a truck, not the Jackal Bikers. If an infantry unit was picked as the target of a charge, you can roll a dice. On a 1, nothing happens and you lost a command point. On a 2, 3 or 4, the enemy suffers D3 mortal wounds before they roll their charge move. On a 5+, it's an automatic 3 mortal wounds. I dislike that this stratagem can fail to do anything, but it's good to cause mortal wounds. Grenades is more reliable and better, but any infantry unit can use this. Pure Strain Genestealers can cause mortal wounds. They don't have grenades. And it's useful to use against elite enemy units, monsters, vehicles, and so on to hopefully knock off a few wounds. Just by having this stratagem available, some opponents will choose not to charge you just in case you use it and kill their unit. And unlike Overwatch, you don't need to have line of sight to use this, so you can hurt enemies that are charging from out of line of sight. And as this happens when a charge is declared, it doesn't care if the charge is successful. So it can dissuade some of those 10 inches, well, might as well try it, sort of charge attempts. The last stratagem is Lying in Wait. You use it in your opponent's movement phase, and it applies to a Genestealer Cult battle line unit that is waiting in Cult Ambush. So they've died, you've spent the resurgence points, they're now waiting in Cult Ambush. When you're setting up your unit using the Cult Ambush marker, they can be set up anywhere on the battlefield within 6 inches of that Cult Ambush marker, as long as they're not in engagement range of the enemy. Whereas normally when you're using a Cult Ambush marker, you have to be set up wholly within 3 of it, so it's sort of like tunnel crawlers, but in your opponent's turn, and you need a Cult Ambush marker. It helps in the edge cases where the enemy is not quite 9 inches from the marker so that it would have been removed, but it would have been difficult to set your units up. It seems nice to set up Metamorphs close and then have them surge move into combat after getting shot, but no, this is battle line units only. There's another use for it because enemies coming from reserves, like Deep Strike or Strategic Reserves, don't remove Cult Ambush markers because they have not completed a normal move. They count as doing a normal move, but they haven't done a normal move. There's an FAQ that confirms my interpretation is the way it should be. So an enemy could be almost on top of you, on or near an objective, and you can still deploy a unit that they have to deal with. A unit that then gets shot and charged. It is the enemy's turn after all. So, Tunnel Crawlers, Primed and Readied, and Return to the Shadows are the most important stratagems to remember. In fact, you can cycle round them. Arrive from reserves and use Primed and Readied, and or Tunnel Crawlers. Then use Return to the Shadows. Then come back on the board, and again use Primed and Readied, or Tunnel Crawlers. It's a command point hungry army. But the stratagems are not our only shenanigans. We have enhancements. Unlike the enhancements in the Biosanctic Broodsurge and Xenocreed, they can go on any character. There is no limits, which really opens up the tactics of the detachment. The first one is Prowling Adjutant. Once per turn, when an enemy unit ends a normal move, advanced move, or fallback move within 9 inches of you, if your unit is not in engagement range, you can make a normal move of up to D6 with your unit. You can use this to get back into a transport. Embark. So in your turn, you would have gotten out, moved, the truck moves up close to your unit, or the thing you want to charge, they shoot, the units that got out from inside will shoot, like Metamorphs with Hand Flamers, then you get the truck bonus to fully reroll the wound roll, then the Metamorphs will charge. You don't get the sustained hits because disembarking is not coming from reserves as far as the detachment rule is concerned. But then in the enemy turn, assuming you're not in engagement range, the enemy moves another unit within 9 inches of your metamorphs with the character that has the Prowling Adjutant enhancement, and you use your Prowling Adjutant, unlike the Biophagus in the squad, to move back into the truck. It is a normal move, so you can do that. Any normal move can let you embark. Or with metamorphs. Never mind the truck, prowl adjutantly closer to the enemy in the movement phase, and if they shoot you, brood surge into combat in their shooting phase. You can do 2 of these surge moves in a turn, just not more than 1 on the same unit within the same phase. So a Jackal Alphas, you could move and shoot, and then move again in your turn, that's their ability, and then move again in the opponent's movement phase. That on top of like Scout and a high movement characteristic means you got movement for days. This Prowling Adjutant enhancement doesn't trigger the Jackal Biker's demolition run again as it once did. That can only be used in your movement phase. You don't even need to be that clever with it. You could have it on a character with 20 neophytes. The enemy gets close, you move away from the enemy, or to the side of the enemy, either to get more models onto an objective, or avoid them to make a charge harder. Assuming you can roll high enough, it is a random d6 movement. Our time is nigh. Well, it is the Host of Ascension, so our time better be really, really nigh. Once per battle, when your unit declares a charge, you can use the enhancement, and if it does, until the end of the phase, add 2 20 charge rolls made for the bearer's unit. This doesn't have to be a charge from Deep Strike, but a 7-inch charge, effectively, from Deep Strike sounds good, because it's 2d6 plus 2. You've shortened the charge required by 2. And you can command reroll the charge if needed. The enhancement lasts for the phase, so that reroll will still have the plus 2 to the charge roll. As it's once per game, returning to the shadows, then coming back doesn't give you another go. But if you had an Abominant, either alone or with Aberrants, this is like the Biosanctic Brood Surge for players that don't have more than 1 squad of Aberrants. There is a stratagem in that detachment that lets you charge better from reserves. Or you have it on a Primus or a Biophagus leading Acolytes or Metamorphs. And it's very good for charging enemies out of line of sight. It's very good at charging Titanic things, as either way, they cannot fire Overwatch. Third enhancement, a chink in their armor. Each time the bearer is set up on the battlefield as reinforcements, each time, until the end of your next fight phase, ranged weapons have lethal hits. So this triggers at the same start and end point as the detachment rule. Sad thing is, it's ranged weapons only, so it won't be able to help like metamorphs in combat. So it's best on a character supporting a massive shots from 20 neophytes. Bullets work. Combine it with sustained hits, roll some 6s, and win the game. But, as we said from Primed and Readied, there's a way to roll 5s and win the game! Because it applies each time you are set up as reinforcements, so as long as the character is alive, you use Return to the Shadows to leave the board, go back into strategic reserves, and return to the board, which activates the ability again, just as it activates the detachment rule. The last one is Assassination Edict. Whenever your unit attacks a character unit, add 1 to the hit roll. That could help the demo charges hit out at enemy bodyguards and characters. Unit share keywords, so all models in an attached unit have the character keyword. The Big Imperial Knights have the character keyword. Lone Operatives have the character keyword and might also have stealth, as our Sanctus does, as our Reductus Saboteur does. They are characters, so we can more easily kill the enemy's equivalent. It can help any big smashy character. Like an Abominant, they can hit on a 2+, and using Epic Challenge, which gives them precision, they can kill characters. The problem is, you can only have 3 out of these 4 great enhancements. That is the cap in normal games. Crusade works a bit differently. And they are quite expensive enhancements. You don't see any 5-point or 10-point enhancements here. Okay, let's talk a bit more about the tactics that you use in this detachment. First good tactic, save money by using my affiliates that are linked in the description. There you can get models cheaper than going through Games Workshop. Next tactic. The Primus can be used to move everything into reserve. That's more units that can get the benefit of the detachment rule. But don't do that. Keep at least 10 neophytes on the home objective, just to claim that and score some points in turn 1. People think that there is still a rule that if you have nothing on the table, you lose, or the game ends, and that is not true. No such rule exists anywhere in 10th edition. It was a rule in 7th edition and 8th edition, but in early 9th edition, the idea that you could kill everything of the enemy and none of the victory point stuff mattered, that went away. So you could lose the neophytes on turn 1, have all the rest of your army in reserve, and you have not lost. You do have a different problem: where to deploy. If everything is in reserves, then you have no board control. The enemy could go first, move on to all the central objectives. In your turn 1, the neophytes sit there scared, and then the enemy turn 2, they spread out and make it hard for you to place your incoming units anywhere useful. This is on a board that is 60 inches by 44 inches. A size that is the same even at 1000 points, another thing people miss. In 9th edition, you played on a 44 by 30 inch board for 1000 point games. 10th edition has the same board size until you are playing Onslaught, which is 3000 points per side or more. So you usually will have space to deploy your units. You won't be screened out of everywhere, but you won't have much space to place units in a place where they can be valuable. And all the while, your opponent is scoring victory points. Host of Ascension has the Tunnel Crawler stratagem, but that won't save you if the enemy has full board control. So how do we avoid that? We have more than just neophytes on the board. Have either pure strain Genestealers that infiltrate and can block the enemy movement turn 1. That gives a limit of how far the enemy can move, so there will be an area of the board that is empty for you to deploy in. The alternative unit is Scouting Jackal Bikers that can reach an objective in the center before the game starts with their 9-inch scout, and then they can move 12 inches after that. Both are annoying units to take out with one enemy unit in one go. 5 pure strain Genestealers have 10 wounds between them and a 5+ invulnerable save. 5 Atalan Jackals have 12 wounds between them, including that wolf quad, and stealth. Killing them will cost your opponent time, so we need to stop the enemy from flooding the middle of the board in their turn 1, which could stop us deploying in that open space to fight back. This is why the pure strains are my preference over bikes. 2 squads of pure strains are good at being a line the enemy cannot cross, no matter how fast. Even if the enemy units can fly, they can't end their move on top of our pure strains. That stops big flying units like Demon Princes, Demon Primarchs, and flying grav tanks from landing on top of us. You don't need a Clamavus who can stop enemy deep strike with a radius of 12 inches, because that doesn't stop movement across the board. And you have to run the Clamavus into empty space. Better to run more neophytes from your deployment zone. Then there is the natural 9-inch aura of you cannot deep strike near me. We are doing a lot of deep striking on turn 2, in some cases turn 3. Save command points for the good turns. Maybe you only have 1 unit come from reserves in turn 2, and the whole strike is turn 3. Turn 2 could be dropping in 20 neophytes to block the enemy moving too far. Or maybe with them you drop in a small unit of like 5 acolytes with hand flamers to complete a secondary mission. In the first turn, if you would struggle to score a secondary mission, or can only get the weaker half of it, like sabotage but you can't get into the enemy deployment zone, get rid of it. That gives you an extra command point in the 2025-2026 mission deck, assuming you haven't already gained an extra command point in that battle round from acolytes with auto pistols. They have a mining ability to mine for command points. You use these stored up command points on the good stratagems. Don't worry too much about scoring in the first turn. Primary missions are the primary mission. If you can score 8 out of the 10 secondary missions that you draw, that is all 40 secondary mission points, or close enough to it. Ah no, I won with 96 victory points instead of 100 victory points. You need to be in a winning position before you can care about how crushing your victory is. So have enough units on the board at the start of the game that you can control the middle of the board. Have enough units in reserve that you can land and complete secondary missions easily, and that you can land and strike hard against the enemy. And focus on that primary mission. Part of our super strike comes from having lots of squads of 20 neophytes, or as many squads as the points limit allows. Maybe a squad of 20 neophytes for every like 600 points of the game you're playing. So if it was a 1200 point game, have 2 squads of 20 neophytes. If it's a 2000 point game, have 3, maybe 4 squads of 20 neophytes. You'll want a character leading them, like a Benefictus that gives them lethal hits to stack on top of the sustained hits and ignore cover you get from the detachment rule, like a Primus that gives you +1 to hit, like a Nexus that makes the stratagems 1 command point fewer. The Nexus or Primus wants to have a chink in their armor. Have your 20 neophytes. Have an auto gun on the neophyte leader. I suppose if you had the pistol, then they can fire their anointed pistol and also that auto pistol that they have. They don't have to give up their auto pistol. So you can fire 2 pistols from that one model. Pistol is decided on a model by model basis, not as a whole unit. Then you've got 4 heavy weapons, 4 special weapons. 2 grenade launchers, yes. 2 flamers or 2 webbers, it's up to you. If this unit is going to hunt monsters and vehicles, go for the webbers. They have devastating wounds on a 6. If you're hunting infantry, go for the flamers. They will wound on a 3, 4, or a 5. Have seismic cannons either way. Have mining lasers if you're going against the enemy vehicles. Have the 6-shot hitting on 4's naturally heavy stubbers, which love sustained hits and lethal hits, if you're going against infantry. This is maybe the one detachment where I say heavy stubbers are good. And use that Adept Roll app to figure out which one is best for you. And write down all the parts of the combo so you don't forget it. +1 to hit from the Primus. Reroll hit rolls of 1 from a Jackalalphus. Lethal hits. Sustained hits. Critical hits are on unmodified 5s. When you get to the wound roll, +1 to wound if you're using coordinated strike. When the enemy armor save is being rolled, extra point of armor penetration if you'd already hit them with the Ridge Runner. And you ignore cover. Write that all down so you don't forget any part of it. You can get too focused on the primed and readied part and forget that you had +1 to hit from the Primus. The Jackalalphus is very optional. They can give you rerolls on the hit rolls of 1, but that only works if you hit the enemy with your one-shot sniper rifle. So often they are just skipped. The Primus used to be more popular, but as they no longer give full rerolls to hit, people have dropped them in favour of just a Benefactus, or a Nexus, or even an Icon Ward with a chink in their armour. Then the 20 neophytes are very difficult to kill in response. 5+ feel no pain. But the Nexus is a good leader. You can use Return to the Shadows or Deadly Snare in your opponent's turn, and that is free, because you can reduce the cost of a stratagem used on that unit by 1 each battle round. If you're going second, land in your turn 2 and use primed and readied but at 1 command point. Then in the enemy turn 3, leave the battlefield with Return to the Shadows. You could rapid ingress, which would cost 0 command points, land on an objective, and in your coming turn, you still will have the benefit of the detachment rule, but in your command phase, you can use a plan generations in the making to sticky an objective. It will stay as yours until the enemy can take it from you, and we're not going to have the neophytes on it to be a convenient charge target. You'll want to save up and pre-plan what you're going to spend your command points on, like tunnel crawlers, primed and readied, Return to the Shadows, also rapid ingress. The core stratagems are very good. Here's a 1000 point army that puts a lot of these tactics into practice. So the army list is a Primus with a chink in their armor, they're going to lead 20 neophytes. There is an Abominant with Assassination Edict. They don't lead any unit. She don't need no man. There's a Biophagus with Our Time Is Nigh, leading 10 Metamorphs. We have 5 Handflame Acolytes, 2 squads of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers, a Reductus Saboteur, 10 Neophytes, and an Achilles Ridge Runner. The 10 Neophytes start on the home objective. Once we've used a plan generations in the making on it, we can leave and go to the midboard, assuming the enemy has no more reserves to arrive and they don't have any leave and return stratagems, the equivalent of Return to the Shadows. In 1000 point games under the 2025 to 2026 mission deck, you can advance and do actions. Run! Get victory points. The 10 Metamorphs with the Biophagus will be dropping in and charging something with Our Time Is Nigh. I'm happy for this unit to have auto pistols instead of hand flamers. I won't be shooting the unit we charge, so there's no need for the hand flamers. And you don't want to make a 7-inch charge harder by killing some of the enemy models that you were about to charge. And having a automatic 6-inch surge is very useful. That is one side of an objective marker to the other. Get in combat, and you will fight before the enemy. Because it is not your turn when you surge. The 5 Handflame Acolytes start in reserves, Handflamers only, no need to bother with the demo charges that would hit on a 5+. I would still have a cult icon on one of the models. If the enemy kills 3 of you, and you have a cult icon on an objective, you fully regenerate the unit. But their job is to deep strike and Handflamer enemies on their home objective, Handflamer weak enemies that are hiding behind walls, and complete secondary missions. Tunnel Crawlers is saved for the Neophytes, or generally we're not doing that to save on command points. The 2 squads of 5 Pure Strains infiltrate to stop enemy infiltrators from infiltrating. They can charge and claw up something in the first turn, They could complete secondary missions in the first turn. They could just run in front of the enemy and stand there, hissing at them. And then the enemy has to kill you. That's usually the extent of their first turn movement and effect. Having a Reductus there stops the enemy rushing the middle of the board without casualties. Her planted explosive ability means if the enemy finishes a move within 9 inches, you can set off a bomb and usually it does a lot of damage. So you'll want to have her hidden behind a ruin, but also be within 9 inches of an objective marker, like wholly within 9 of that objective marker. So the enemy can't put a model anywhere on it without exploding. And the Reductus Saboteur is a unit that can complete actions in turn 1 while the Pure Strains run off to distract the enemy. The 20 Neophytes with the Primus start the game on the board. We need to do this, otherwise we are not deploying at least 500 points of our army on the board at the start, as in at least half the army needs to start there. 10 Pure Strains, the Reductus Saboteur, the Ridge Runner, 10 Neophytes, and this unit of 20 Neophytes with the Primus start on the table. We're going to put them in reserves using the Decoys and Misdirection ability. That can exceed the reserves limit. And maybe also move the Ridge Runner into reserves as well. In fact, if you knew that you were going to get such a good deployment from Infiltrators in the first turn, you could also put the Metamorphs and Biophagus on the board as a dud drop, so you can see more of the enemy deployment before you're done with deployment, and you move them and the Neophytes and the Ridge Runner into reserves. But at the very least, you want to make sure those Metamorphs with the Biophagus and the 20 Neophytes with the Primus are in reserves at the start of the game. I know some people like to put them on the board and then at the end of the enemy's turn 1, whether going first or second, use Return to the Shadows to put them in reserve. But I think that spends unnecessary command points. I know it would be so funny, but don't make a 1000 point of 6 units with 3 units in reserves, then use the Primus to move all the units on the table into reserves, leading to an empty table on our side. Many laughs would be had, but it's a bad idea. You would lose the space in no man's land, you'd have no Neophytes to use a planned generations in the making to sticky that home objective, and you would have nothing to complete secondary missions in the first turn. It could be a fun way to represent a true Genestealer Cult ambush in a story-driven mission, but it's not generally advised. So when the 20 Neophytes do drop in, they can spread out and take objectives after their initial, hopefully powerful shooting. Rapid ingress onto an empty objective, use planned generations in the making to keep control of it, move, shoot, and at the end of the enemy turn, return to the shadows with the objective you touched left under your control. The Ridge Runner has a mining laser and a spotter. I also am quite happy having a Survey Auger. I know that the detachment rule gives us ignore cover, but in turns after that, having ignore cover on the many neophyte shots is very useful. The Ridge Runner could start on the board, it could scout and shoot enemies, or we could come from reserve. You have to come in from the board edge, you can't deep strike, but the Twin Stubbers could shoot at whatever we want to use with Crossfire for the Metamorphs or Neophytes, while the big mining laser shoots a bigger target, like tanks, monsters, heavy infantry that have 3 or more wounds. The Abominant with Assassination Edict is our assassin. They can also hit heavy infantry, they can also smash vehicles. It's a strength 12 hammer. But we hit characters on a 2+. Use Rapid Ingress on this character instead of the Neophytes, or as well but on different turns. Then in your coming turn, move, charge, and smash with sustained hits. Use that epic challenge, kill enemy characters that are giving out force multiplying bonuses. As Big Hammer Lady can come back to life and at full health, this can be very annoying for your enemy with the resources of a 1000 point army, especially when we deplete that army through murder. If you don't like Big Hammer Ladies, well, how dare you? Have another Ridge Runner instead. Or if you think there are still not enough big striking units after you've played this list, swap the Reductus Saboteur and the Abominant for 20 more Neophytes, though those Neophytes would have no character support. Alternatively, have 10 Acolytes and a Locus for 175 points instead of the Saboteur and Abominant. Then you have another unit that will enjoy sustained hits, and has anti-vehicle weapons, and fights first because of the Locus. That's a good counter to tank-heavy lists, or for combat armies that want to charge you. If you think that there are not enough units to hold objectives and complete missions, don't forget that we have Resurgence points and I will be bringing back the Pure Strains to fulfill that role. But I think there are more than enough units to do the actions in the original list. The 20 Neophytes and the 10 Metamorphs are there to mess up enemies, focus on a flank if there are 3 big blocks, while Big Hammer Lady deals with the characters leading units. Using Epic Challenge, any characters that are big and scary like the Scorpeth Lord, and vehicles and monsters. Increasing in size to a 2,000 point game, things are a little bit different. There are more units, there are more enemy units, but there's the same size board. And you don't get any additional command points to scale with the size of game. But we do get more resurgence points. That's nice. So the 2,000 point army list has an Icon Ward with 20 Neophytes, a Nexus with a chink in their armor and 20 Neophytes, a Benefactus with Assassination Edict and 20 Neophytes. There's a Primus, not with 20 Neophytes, with 10 Acolytes with auto pistols and mining tools. A Biophagus with Prowling Adjutant leading 10 Metamorphs. They are in a truck, or they're one unit that can be in a truck. They're the unit I'm sticking in the truck. There's a Reductus Saboteur, 2 squads of 5 Pure Strains, 1 squad of 5 Jackal Bikers, a smaller squad of 5 Acolytes with auto pistols and mining tools, a squad of 10 Neophytes, 2 squads of 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, and 3 Achilles Ridge Runners. That is 1,995 points. The 2 squads of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers are deployed first. I also recommend you write a list in the order that you're going to be deploying units. Start with infiltrating units, because then you can stop enemies infiltrating in that space. You could string the Pure Strains out in the open, because we're going to redeploy at least these 2 units with the Primus. Then they can start the game in a position of safety. Reductus Saboteur deploys next, and they do the same thing as at 1,000 points. Have it so that the objective marker is wholly within 9 inches of her, and be ready for the enemy to step on your bombs. And when the enemy does step on your bombs to take on the objective, next turn step out and throw a demolition charge. It hits on a 3+. We also have our indirect fire bombs that can hurt some enemies, like the kind of units that would hang around on the enemy home objective. In turn 1, you can use a Ridge Runner with a mortar and a Survey Auger. That can help to get an extra point of armor penetration and ignore cover on those indirect bombs. Enemies get the benefit of cover whenever you fire indirectly. So her remote explosives can do more damage than the profile would suggest. The 5 Bikers do normal bike things. They can scout forward, they can move up with the Pure Strains, we can block the enemy in their deployment zone if that's what you want to do, and that probably is what you want to do. Move fast, drive sideways, the enemy can't get past you. If the enemy can't leave their deployment zone in turn 1 as they destroy the bikes, you have space in the middle of the board to land your reserves in turn 2. You can do a demolition run once you've finished your move to hurt enemies that are not going to be bothered by Pure Strains. They're also very speedy, so they can do first turn secondary missions. It depends what you need. If you want the Reductus Saboteur to shoot indirectly, if you want the Genestealers to advance, if you want the bikes to move up quickly, maybe you discard one of the secondary missions on the first turn. Having control of the board for in the future of the game is more important than getting like 3 victory points in turn 1. The 20 Neophytes with the Benefactus and Assassination Edict will go for character blocks. The Benefactus has a good las cannon head that likes +1 to hit, and with that and the mining lasers, you can go for character monsters and vehicles like Hive Tyrants, Primarchs, and Chaos Knights, the bigger Chaos Knights. The 20 Neophytes with the Icon Ward are a good blocking unit that can turn up with Tunnel Crawlers. The enemy will have to heavily commit to break this unit because we have the Icon to regenerate, and the Icon Ward gives the unit a 5+ Feel No Pain. They have anti-tank weapons like mining lasers and webbers, things that don't need lethal hits to cause damage. The 20 Neophytes with the Nexus have a chink in their armor. They will be using primed and readied for 1 command point. Then you get the sustained hits and the lethal hits on a 5+. They're equipped with anti-infantry weapons. So their job is fighting Imperial Guard platoons, Poxwalker hordes, blocks of Kroot, and we don't care if they have stealth. When our critical hits are on a 5+, that is still a hit. This unit can also do a lot of damage to tanks because of those lethal hits, as long as we have some armor penetration backing it up. They are versatile, and they will be going up and down through the game with Return to the Shadows. Remember, it can be free with the Nexus. Once per battle round, a stratagem used on that unit is 1 command point fewer, even going to 0 command point cost. There are 3 Ridge Runners that can support each of these units. 2 of them have mining lasers and spotters, 1 of them has the mortar and a Survey Auger. The one with the Survey Auger will support the Reductus Saboteur in turn 1, and then it can support the Neophytes with the Icon Ward that block the enemy, or you can have it support the Nexus's unit that's anti-infantry, where the mortar will do more damage against an infantry unit. whereas the mining lasers can focus on bigger enemies. But remember, you don't have to fire the mortar and the heavy stubbers on the Ridge Runner at the same enemy. As long as you hit, one of the units you hit can be affected by crossfire. You can pick which one after seeing which you hit. And you could use the mortar to just cause damage, as you can use the mining lasers to just cause damage, while the heavy stubbers are there to apply crossfire to an enemy unit. The 10 acolytes with the Primus will use rapid ingress. Their job is to kill Terminators and lighter vehicles. They can damage heavier vehicles, but they're unlikely to destroy them, so they need help from one of the 20 neophyte blocks. Take down enemies of your choosing when you want to. When you want to should be as soon as you're able to, and your priorities are fast-moving enemies, those enemy units that are going to be used to complete missions, and anything that can blow through your neophyte hordes quickly. The Biophagus with Prowling Adjutant and the Metamorphs are in the truck. They are an option for primed and readied because they have lethal hits in combat. You jump out of the truck shoots, the Metamorphs fire their hand flamers, they get to fully reroll wounds, they charge something, they have lethal hits, the Biophagus can give them +1 to wound against an infantry target, an enemy moves closer, Prowling Adjutant back inside the truck. You can keep repeating this, in, out, oh yeah, do you like that? The Hand Flamer Acolytes are there to complete secondary missions and hurt enemies already on objectives. Their ability lets them reroll wound rolls when attacking with their hand flamers or their claws if the enemy is on an objective. It doesn't have to be an objective we control, it doesn't have to be an objective that they control. Just enemies on an objective. No demo charges for this squad, a cult icon for hand flamers. The squad of 5 acolytes stays on the home objective and they're gonna mine for command points. The 10 neophytes start on the home objective to sticky it just so indirect fire can't blow up our 5 acolytes, and then we lose our home objective, which is very important in missions like Linchpin. The 10 neophytes can then advance to another objective, leaving the acolytes behind. Then we have a unit in the middle of the board that can take up space, that can hold objectives, and can block enemies from charging the big 20 neophyte blocks. I'm pretty happy with this list. Another option is to have the Primus lead the 20 neophytes instead of an Icon Ward, and swap the Icon Ward for a Biophagus leading the 10 acolytes with tools. You still rapid ingress the unit. They can deal with vehicles a bit better. They have lethal hits, anti-vehicle 4+ mining tools. You can also fight infantry, including toughness 6 possessed and Gravis models that have 3 wounds that don't want to be hit by our damage 3 mining tools. And the Biophagus can give you +1 to wound against those infantry once per game. Right, now you just need to know which units start on the table and which ones start in reserves. So all the neophytes and their characters start in reserves. The 2 squads of acolytes with hand flamers in reserves, the 2 Achilles Ridge Runners with the mining lasers in reserves. That leaves the Achilles Ridge Runner with the mortar on the table, the 10 neophytes, the 5 acolytes that are on the home objective, the 5 Jackal Bikers, the 2 squads of 5 Pure Strains, the Reductus Saboteur, the Goliath truck with the Metamorphs and the Biophagus inside, and the Primus and 10 acolytes with auto pistols. The acolytes and Primus are going to start on the table, but they're going to be moved into reserves by the Primus with his decoys and misdirection ability, because at least 1,000 points need to start on the table, and it is 1,015 points with the Primus and acolytes. That covers your units, that covers your deployment. This video covers the tactics of the Host of Ascension. If you have thoughts on this, put it in the comments of the video. If you have money to spare, put it in my tip jar that's linked in the description. It's a strong detachment. Although it had some penalties in September 2025, it's still doing really well, and is a detachment that I have a very high win rate with. It has board presence, it has shenanigans, it has the power to take out big enemies. But perhaps we just need even bigger guns. That would be another detachment of the Genestealer Cult. My darlings and viewers, have a great January.